जय राधा माधव कुंज विहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय राधा माधव माधव राधे जय राधा राधे हरि राधा राधे राधे जय गौरांगी बैंगलोरीश्वर गौरांगी बैंगलोरीश्वर गौरांगी जय जगन्नाथ जय बलदेवा जय सुभद्रा जय सुदर्शन जय लक्ष्मी नरसिंह जय अनंत प्रहलाद नरसिंह जय अनंत जय गौरानिताय गौरानिताय जय निताय चैतन्य जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव जय जय गुरुदेव निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल हरि नाम संगीत महायज्ञ की जय जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्रजाचार्य स्तोत्र शतक His Divine Grace, Abhay Charanaravindra Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Stotra Shatak. His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Jai Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Chat Goswami Prabhu ki jai. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौर गोविंद की जय। जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण चंद्र गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन गिरिराज महाराज की जय। मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। मायापुर नवदीप धाम की जय। श्री क्षेत्र श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। जमुना माई की जय। कावेरी माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी महारानी की जय। समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय। हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय। ग्रंथ श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories and glories and glories and glories to Shri Guru Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयन्ति जय। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवतं सेवया भगवती तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुलङ्गायतिं गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुदिनतारिणं परमानन्दं माधवं श्रीचैतन्य ईश्वरं हरि ओम तत्सत्. Hi Krishna. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, and the shloka number is 9. 1 second, I'll have to just give me 1 minute to open the shloka, please. Yes, there we get the shloka. Let me just share the screen. I hope the screen is visible to everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, as I said, we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26. The chapter is titled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, and the shloka number is 9. Devahuti uvacha prakriteha purushasyapi lakshanam purusha uttama ruti karyano asya sat asatya yat atmakam. Devahuti uvacha prakriteha purushasyapi lakshanam purusham uttama ruhi karanyo asya sat asachayam atmakam. Devahuti uvacha prakriteha purushasyapi lakshanam purusham uttama ruti karanyo asya sat asachayat atmakam. Devahuti uvacha prakritiha purushasyapi lakshasanam purusha uttama kriti karyanao asya satasaccha yat atmakam. Word translation. Devahuti uvacha. Devahuti said, Prakriti of his energies, Purushasya of the Supreme Persons, Api also, Lakshanam characteristics, Purusha Uttama, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bruhi kindly explain, Karanayo causes, Asya of this creation, Sat Asat manifest and unmanifest, Cha and Yat Atmakam consists of which. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Devahuti said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of Supreme Person and his energies, for both of these are causes of this manifest and unmanifest creation. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Prakriti or material nature is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband as a wife and with her children as a mother. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that He impregnates mother with children, living entities, and thereafter all the species of living entities become manifest. The relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now, an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. The product of the relationship is stated here to be manifest and unmanifest material world. The unmanifest material world is the subtle Mahat Tattva, and from the Mahat Tattva, the material manifestation has emerged. In the Vedic literature, it is said that by the glance of the Supreme Lord, the total material energy is impregnated, and then everything is born of material nature. It is also confirmed in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that under his glance, Adhyakshena, under his direction and by his will, nature is working. It is not that the nature works blindly after understanding the position of the conditioned soul in relation to material nature. Devahuti wanted to know how nature works under the direction of the Lord and what is the relationship between the material nature and the Lord. In other words, she wanted to learn the characteristics of Supreme Lord in the relation to the material nature. The relationship of the living entities with the matter and that of the Supreme Lord with matter are certainly not on the same level, although the Mayavadis may interpret it in that way. When it is said that the living entities are bewildered, the Mayavadi philosophers ascribe this bewilderment to Supreme Lord, but that is not applicable. The Lord is never bewildered. That is the difference between the personalist and the impersonalist. Devahuti is not unintelligent. She has enough intelligence to understand that the living entities are not on the same level of the Supreme Lord. Because the living entities are infinitesimal, they become bewildered or conditioned by material nature. But this does not mean that the Supreme Lord is also conditioned or bewildered. The difference between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of the material nature, and he is therefore not subject to its control. He is the controller, neither by spiritual nature nor by material nature. I'm sorry, I repeat that again. He is controlled neither by spiritual nature nor by material nature. He is the supreme controller himself, and he cannot be compared to the ordinary living entities who are controlled by the laws of nature. Two words used in this word are Sat and Asat. The cosmic manifestation is Sat. It does not exist. But the material energy of the Supreme Lord is Sat and or ever existing. Material nature is ever existing in its subtle form as the energy of the Lord, but it is sometimes manifest this non-existent or temporary existent nature, the cosmos. The analogy may be made with the father and the mother. The mother and the father exist, but sometimes the mother begets children. Similarly, this cosmic manifestation, which comes from the unmanifest, material nature of the Supreme Lord, sometimes appears and again disappears. But the material nature is ever existing, and the Lord is the supreme cause of both subtle and gross material manifestation of this material world. Om Tat Sat. That ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to Canto 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chapter 26, chapter titled Fundamental Principles of the Material Nature. Om Tat Sat. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagarjatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadunam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarobhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we welcome all the devotees to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam understanding. We'll not call it as reading because we're trying to understand from Srimad Bhagavatam. And previous chapters, we've seen that, or rather, in the previous couple of chapters that we've seen Mother Devahuti, after giving birth to Kapil Dev, and Kardam Muni leaves the house, and Mother Devahuti is dependent on Lord Kapila or Kapila Dev. Now, one should really understand that as per the Chaturvarna that we have, the four orders that we also follow, is that after a certain age, the husband should really not worry about the family matters. When the children grow up, especially when the son grows up and he takes the responsibility, the father should give away his responsibilities. And he should, for the perfection of goal of life, he should proceed towards the forest, or he should practice full-time Krishna consciousness rather than engaging himself or ourselves in full-time mongering at home. The father is supposed to be giving a good education to the children, give them the Vedic education, give them the Vedic parampara, and then at a later date, move on. Depending on the children, the mother has to further continue. And again, within our Vedic system, it is very, very, very nicely known. Today, we're talking about the freedom of the female child. Well, we are not against the freedom or empowerment, which is actually good. Empowering means giving the girl child the Vedic knowledge and empowering her in the knowledge of the Shastras, which is called the real empowerment. But these days, the empowerment is that she can go out in the night alone. She can do whatever she wants to do. She can take decisions of her life, however bad they may be, on her own. No, that's not called empowerment. Empowerment actually means empowering her with the knowledge of spiritual life, empowering her with the knowledge of the Vedas, the Shastras. So here it is seen that Mother Devahuti is dependent on Kapila Muni after Kardama Muni left the house to proceed into the forest to perfect his life. So a lady is always dependent, a girl child or a woman is always dependent. Initially, she is under the control or under the supervision of the father. And as she grows up and she gets married, she goes under the control of the husband. And when the husband either leaves the body or leaves the house, she again goes under control of the son. So here it is very nicely seen. Kapila Dev is taking care of his mother, and Mother Devahuti, she knows very well that this child of mine is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Kapila Muni himself is Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's actually giving out this knowledge to Mother Devahuti, talking on various topics. And at one point of time, Kapila Muni also mentioned saying that I will give you the knowledge which I have given earlier to Vivaswan, the sun god. So there it is seen that he is not creating or concocting anything on his own. He says whatever has been given has to be followed. So we have to also follow the knowledge which is given by Lord Shri Krishna himself 5,000 years back on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The Gyan of Gita, the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita which he spoke actually to Arjuna, but it was meant for us, for all the human beings, all the living entities, to perfect their life and go back home, back to Godhead. So here Devahuti is seen asking questions to Kapila Muni. Well, here if you see, she's not asking for her own benefit. It is for the benefit of the society at large that she is asking these questions. Yeah, and well, this is a very complicated subject if we really look at it. When we compare it to Krishna consciousness, which most of us feel is all about melodious kirtan, chanting over the holy name. Yes, it is. If we have to get relief from the material entanglement, we have to just sing melodious kirtan for the Lord, glorify the Lord, chant the holy name of the Lord, worship their lordships. But then what happens is, when the Mayavadis see us in this way, when we're enjoying the melodious Kirtan, they tell us that you don't know any tattva. You're only engaged in some kind of a Kirtan. But in reality, devotees are more intelligent than the Mayavadis. Here, if we see Devahuti is asking the questions to the Supreme Lord, who has appeared within this material world by his own will. Nobody needs to call the Lord and tell him, you do this, you do that. No, he comes by his own will. And here, Kapila Dev is born as the son of Devahuti by his own will. And she is taking advantage of this and asking other fundamental truths. Who other than the Lord can be the best person to answer the questions, and especially when it comes to the fundamental truth of our life. So here, she's going on asking a lot of questions which are very, very practical, which are very, very fundamental. Vyasadeva also explains the conversation between Mother Devahuti and Kapila Dev in Srimad Bhagavatam at length, and then there is this conversation which happens. These questions are directly concerning us, we the living entities in this material nature. Well, what is her question? Her question in this particular shloka is, kindly explain to me the characteristics of Supreme Person and his energies, for both these are causes of the manifest and unmanifest creation. This is the question that Mother Devahuti is asking, saying that, can you please explain me the Lord? Lord, please go on explaining me this. So Prabhupada in the purport very clearly says that Prakriti is connected with both Supreme Lord and the living entity. We all know about the living entities, but we don't really know about the Supreme Personality Godhead. But at the same time, we are all connected with Prakriti. Prakriti is our surrounding, the material nature. Supreme Lord is supreme. And he is known to everybody. He controls both living entities as well as the material world. We may not be able to see him always, but the scriptures give us the details which we cannot really conceive. If somebody tells you that, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is like this, we can't conceive it with our intelligence or our understanding or our mind. But it is very important that we read the scriptures. When we read the scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, we are given the details about the Lord himself. We are unable to understand him, and we are not able to conceive him with our understanding, because our understanding itself is not correct. What is our understanding? We say, I am this body, I am the mind. So our understanding itself is wrong. So that is the reason it is said that we will not be able to understand the Lord. We will not be able to conceive him with our own intelligence, which is not possible. Then how do we understand? Do we understand the Lord or not? Yes. Our nature is neither of them. It is above all, if you really see, we are all above this material nature. We are originally very, very spiritual. We are uncontaminated. Just because of our association with the material nature here, we have become contaminated. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that which is beyond the power of conception, you can never understand it by logic or reasoning. Such knowledge is actually possible to be known by receiving the knowledge from the right process, from the right person by the right process. Submissively hearing. So here, Devahuti is asking the right questions for our benefit. Many of them may not be able to ask the right questions. Most of us are not able to ask the right question, the fundamental truth of our life. But Devahuti is asking the right question, and Kapila Dev will reply to all of them. The question is relationship between living entity, the nature, and the Supreme Lord. There are three people, involved in this. There are three things involved in this: the material nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Lord. Material nature is connected with both Supreme Lord as well as the living entity. Yes. So the example here in the purport is given by Srila Prabhupada about a woman who's connected with the husband as wife and who's also connected with the children as mother. So as a person, you can have dual relationship. Likewise, the nature is also connected with Supreme. Material nature is also connected with the Supreme Lord, and they're also connected with the living entity. The Supreme Lord impregnates. What is impregnation? Just by the mere glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entities are born. So that means our father and mother are who? Supreme Lord is our father and nature, Prakriti, is our mother. Yeah, just by a single glance, the living entities come out in the nature. It is, it's like coming out of the womb of the mother. We are all coming out of the material nature, accepting different bodies. But is this possible by ourselves? No, it is not possible. It is possible only by the glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we are not independent. We are actually dependent. And there is a connection between us with the material nature as mother and the Supreme Father is the Lord. Just like the children are controlled by both parents, likewise, we are also controlled. Like you have father and mother, both control you. Likewise, here, the Lord as well as the material nature, both control us. Because we have a tendency to enjoy. That's the biggest problem that we have. We try to lord over the material nature, which is actually wrong. And wrongly thinking that we are the enjoyer of the material nature. Without knowing the truth that the enjoyer and the controller, Supreme Personality of Godhead, we are simply trying to control, we are simply trying to enjoy the material nature. But both these efforts are simply a waste of time and which is subject to failure. As the more we try to enjoy or control the material nature, we become more entangled. Material nature is very, very complex. It's very difficult to understand. See, this material nature actually controls everything right from Brahma to the smallest living being. Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita 9.10. Madhyakshena prakriti suyata sa characharam. Suyate sa characharam. Hetunanena kaunteya jagat vipravartate. This material nature, which is one of my energies, so please note this very clearly. Krishna doesn't say this material nature is my energy. He says it is one of my energies and is working under my direction. This is directly spoken by Krishna. He says my energies and is working under my direction. Then he says, oh son of Kunti, he's addressing it to Arjuna, producing all moving and non-moving beings. So Krishna says, I produce all the moving as well as the non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So Krishna creates this, Supreme Personality of Godhead creates this manifestation and annihilates it. And this is happening regularly, again and again. As we see in Brahma Samhita 5.44, very clearly states, Siste siti prayala sadhana shakti reko chaye vayasya bhuvanani bibanti durga ichhanurupamapi yasya chachesha tesha govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. What does it say? The external potency Maya, that is the material nature, who is of the nature of the shadow of Chit potency, that is Krishna's potency, is worshipped by all the people as Durga, Vibanti Durga, the creating, preserving and destroying agency of the mundane world. Mundane world is the material world. I adore the premier Lord Govinda in accordance with whose will Durga conducts herself. This shows very clearly, Durga we all know as the material energy, the controller of, or what we call it as Maya. She actually conducts all her activities under and accordance with the permission of Govinda, the Lord. See, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, all of them are appearing as the directors of three guna. Only Vishnu remains aloof from the material nature, then the others actually get a tinge. Brahma also gets it, Shiva also gets it. They all get attached or they get touched with the material nature. But Vishnu is the only form which is aloof from the material nature. And he is not subject to influence of the material nature. And Supreme Lord is the only controller of the material nature. And material nature is also under the will of the Lord, who's controlling everything, who's controlling all the living entities through the mediums of three guna. These three gunas are the one which influence the living entities, which are actually very pure. Earlier also we spoke about this. This human or this, I would say, the Atma is actually very pure. It just gets contaminated when we come and meet in the material world. It's like the water on a rainy day, you see a water which is coming down. When it drops into the mud, it becomes muddy. If you're able to catch that water before it goes into the mud, if you catch it in a vessel or something, you'll see that it is absolutely purest form. It is said that the rainwater is the best water, most uncontaminated water. Whatever we get today through our filters or through our pipelines or whatever we get is very contaminated water. But what you get from the rain is pure of the purest form of water. But that same pure form, when it touches the mud, touches the ground, becomes muddy. Likewise, the soul is very, very pure. But just because of its contamination, because of its association with the material energy, becomes contaminated. Yeah. Earlier in this chapter also we explained about the same thing about three gunas and how they influence the living entities. Now here Devahuti is asking this question about the Supreme Lord and the living entity, both. And Srila Prabhupada at the end very clearly explains that they are not the same. The Supreme Personality is separate, the living entity is separate. Inside the body, there are two souls. Inside every body, there are two souls. One is the living entity, and the other one is the super soul, that is Atma and Paramatma. And as per the Vaishnava Siddhanta, well, I'm not talking about Mayavada Siddhanta. The Mayavadi philosophers always say they are the same. The Atma and Paramatma are same, which is actually wrong. But as per a Vaishnava Siddhanta, there is a difference. One is controller and the other one is controlled. The controller is Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the controlled is the living entity. Super soul is the controller of the living entity and the whole material world. The material nature facilitates the spiritual growth of the living entity. If the living entity tries to control the material nature for sense gratification, then he's definitely going to fall down. Yeah, when he tries to control, it's like going into the mud. Naturally, you also become muddy, you become dirty. So this is where the whole shloka or the purport of Srila Prabhupada is talking about. And at the end, he's also talking about controlling the material nature. We all try to control the material nature, but we, without knowing that we ourselves are controlled. We are controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I don't know why we are trying to control the material nature. And that's the nature that we are all here fallen, and we are controlled by the laws of material nature. We should never lord over it. Biggest problem comes when we start lording over the material nature, when we say I'm greater than the material nature. No, we are all coming as under the control of it. The material nature is ever existing in its subtle form as the Supreme Personality's energy, but it sometimes manifests this non-existence or temporary existing nature also. The analogy we made with the father and the mother and the father exists, but sometimes the mother begets the children. The father doesn't beget the children. Similarly, this cosmic manifestation that we see, which comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sometimes appears and disappears. But the material nature is ever existing. At the end, Srila Prabhupada says very clearly that the material nature is ever existing, and the Lord is the supreme cause for both subtle and gross manifestation of this material world. So here, at the end, Srila Prabhupada very nicely brings it out, saying that there are two things, Atma and Paramatma. One is controlled, the other one is controller. Controller is Paramatma, Atma is the controlled. So one should never feel that I am controlled and lord it over the material nature. So just to sum up this shloka, what we discussed this morning is basically Devahuti is asking questions to Supreme Personality of Godhead. And she's taking the advantage of the Lord appearing as Son and asking very, very basic fundamental questions for the benefit of the humanity at large. And then Prabhupada actually talks about Prakriti, how Prakriti is connected both with Supreme Lord and the living entity. We all know about the living entities, that we are connected with Prakriti, but Supreme Lord is the Supreme Lord of the whole cosmic manifestation. He controls both the living entities. So you have Prakriti, you have the Jiva. So Paramatma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, actually controls the Jiva as well as the Prakriti. And this basically cannot be conceived by our so-called intelligent brains, which are not really intelligent. Yeah. And our nature as the soul is the purest form, and we are all very spiritual. And the question is between the relationship between living entity and nature and the Supreme Lord. That's how it is discussed in the shloka. Material nature is also connected with Supreme Lord as well as the living entities. And as we move forward, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the Supreme Lord impregnates the nature by his glance. He need not go through the process that the other living entities go through of, impregnating. He just has a glance and then he impregnates and the living entities come out of the nature. Like how, in some forms of life where the babies come out of the womb of the mother. Yeah. So this is what we discussed today. Very nice shloka which talks about, and Mother Devahuti is taking advantage of all this being around and asking questions. So we will end the conversation here. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. And if there are no questions, if there are any comments, or if there are any corrections, please feel free to give out to me. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Okay, Hare Krishna. So if there are no further questions, I will end the session here. Thank you very much for your kind participation and patient hearing. May you have a wonderful Krishna conscious day. Thank you very much. Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.